Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the pre-recorded session for Indianapolis Virtual Conference. I'm here with Leigh Fickling, and she's going to be walking us through accommodations in the workplace. And it already sounds very formal, Leigh, because I'm giving like a to-the-camera sort of presentation, but we're going to keep it kind of casual. So just to get things started, do you mind giving me a little bit, well, not me, I know you, but people who might be meeting you for the first time, a little bit of background on why you are an expert in this particular topic?
Sure thing. Thanks, Kerri. Hey, Friends for Life. My name is Leigh Fickling, and I am the director of the Disability Management System at Duke University and Health System. My background is in educational administration. I'm also an attorney, and so my daytime job is working on accommodations in the education system and in the workplace. My nighttime job is being a full-time pancreas to my 10-year-old daughter, Ava, who has type 1 diabetes. We've been involved with Friends for Life for the last 6 years, and it's definitely one of the highlights of our family activities. So I look forward to talking with you today, Kerri, about workplace accommodations and how to manage diabetes in the workplace.
Well, thank you for taking the time. I mean, I know everyone has kind of a lot of time right now at home that they're working. So thanks for carving out some time this morning to hang out with us. So just as a starting point, and you have a child with diabetes and I'm an adult with diabetes, so we're familiar with diabetes, but do you consider diabetes to be a disability?
I think so. And this is something that we should probably put down sort of as our groundwork from the very beginning. And I know that this is definitely a controversial question because a lot of times people don't like the word disability. They don't want to feel like that they have to rely on disability as some sort of crutch. But under the Americans with Disabilities Act, diabetes is definitely a disability under the ADA. The ADA defines people with disabilities as having a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. So your substantial life activity is your function of the endocrine system that is not working properly. And so because of that, that's how you are disabled under the ADA. So again, I'm not encouraging people to use the word disability as some sort of crutch. I just want you to know what your legal rights are, to where if you do need to request accommodations in the workplace, you absolutely are entitled to do that as a civil right.
So you had talked about the ADA, and so is diabetes as a disability true for every state in the United States?
It is. It's for every state, and it's people have a duty to be able to implement accommodations or explore accommodations in the workplace if their workplace is over 15 people. And so if you work at any sort of workplace that has 15 or more employees, then you have the right to be able to seek accommodations. If you happen to work for a smaller institution or a smaller workplace that has less than 50 employees, there still may be state discrimination laws that would then still allow you to be able to seek out those accommodations.
So we keep using this magic word, accommodations. So can you walk us through, for people who don't know what that actually might look like, what accommodations are? And then if I were looking to ask for one as an employee, how do I go about doing that?
Right, perfect. So an accommodation is really just a fancy word for a modification. And
Okay.
so, if you think about your work day and you have to arrive at a certain time and you have to leave at a certain time, and maybe you're not permitted to be able to have breaks throughout the day. What if you have a diabetes situation to where you need to be able to treat a high or a low blood sugar? What if you happen to be high and you need to go to the bathroom a lot more than you would normally be going? So that would sort of be a break in your work day. Because of the issues that come along with your diabetes, you may need to be able to seek a modification at work to be able to tend to the diabetes and then let you get back to where you're going with your regular workday and the things that you're supposed to be doing. So the purpose of the accommodation is not to give you an unfair advantage over your other workers. It's just to allow you to have a level playing field to be able to do your job as if you did not have diabetes.
So like specifically when you were talking about an accommodation, if I were low at work, like what would that actually look like? Was that a built-in break that I would have as part of my employment contract? Or I'm just curious about the specifics of that.
That's sort of the way that it works out. So permission to be able to have, food and liquids to be able to treat your blood sugar. For you to be able to have medications with you as needed. Whenever you think about different people who may work like in the food service industry, or maybe they work in the health system, that certainly is on our minds now. They may not have their diabetes bags with them at all times.
Got it.
The permission for them to be able to carry glucose tabs or carry a juice box or whatever it is that adults treat for these days. We use 4-ounce juice boxes at our house. Whatever adults happen to use. So for permission for you to be able to have your supplies with you. I think one of the other things that's really important as we think about diabetes today in 2020 is permission for you to be able to have your electronic devices with you also. So permission for you to be able to remotely monitor yourself if you need to, or, to be able to check in with things online with your systems that you may be using for your continuous glucose monitor.
Got it.
Other times when you might need to take a break is, if you happen to be walking through a room and your pump site gets ripped out on a door handle.
That never happens.
Never. That never. If it did happen, you might need extra time for you to be able to step away from your job to be able to go and tend to the diabetes and put in a new site. So those would be examples of accommodations in the workplace. I think most frequently, one of the ones that are sort of more controversial in terms of employment law would be permission to be able to come to work late or not come to work at all if you're having sort of diabetes issues. So if you've been home all night long, you have ketones, you haven't been asleep because you can't get it down, could you possibly call out the next day from work and not have that held against you to where you would have to use your PTO or your vacation or your sick time for that?
Got it. And those are some real world examples that help make stuff like this very concrete. So thank you for that. And also, before we started recording this session, you were really kind to give me kind of a walkthrough on what we would be discussing, and some of it is new to me. So you had mentioned talking about interactive reasonable accommodation processes or processes. And so in terms of what that is, if you could explain what that is, and then also kind of stepping it up a little bit, does a supervisor need to have access to every single medical record that's ever been issued about me? Like, what's the rule on that?
So there's no magic words under the ADA for employees whenever they seek out accommodations. So what you need to do is you either need to talk with your manager or talk with your human resources department. It depends upon the size of your company. There may be a disability office like we have at my place of employment that helps employees go through this reasonable accommodation process, but you need to be able to seek out your manager first probably, or your HR department, and say that you would like to request accommodations under the ADA. We are required to have an interactive process. So that just basically means that you as the employee are included as part of that process. We're not going to make decisions without you. We're going to be able to involve you in the decision-making process, because chances are your HR department is not staffed by somebody that's a diabetes mommy by the daytime and by the night.
It would be so nice though if we were.
Exactly. But, so you may have to do a lot of instructing, and you may have to explain what diabetes is and how it really affects you, because we have a duty to be able to explore these accommodations or these modifications on a case-by-case basis. If we had 5 of our friends for life, we all worked for the same company, and we all went in to be able to ask for accommodations, it might be different for each one of us. Some of us might be on shots, some of us might be on pumps, some of us may have CGMs that we have to deal with. So just because we all have diabetes, it doesn't mean that it affects us the same way in the workplace. So you have a duty to be able to ask for the accommodation. You have a duty to be able to stay part of that process. And as part of the process, you are going to have to provide some medical documentation. But the law is very clear that employers cannot be overburdensome with our requests for documentation. So we don't ask you from your documentation when you were very first diagnosed as a young person with diabetes, and then to see every single one of your after visit summaries that you've had for the last however many years.
Oh God, no, please.
And so, I just, a word of caution with that, depending upon what the condition is, diabetes is pretty cut and dry. You either have it or you don't have it in terms of type 1. So you really sort of have a lower threshold of what you have to provide to the employer. If you're trying to get accommodations for other conditions, you may have to provide additional documentation.
Got it. All right. And so we've walked through a lot of like what I might be asking my employer for, or what someone might be asking their employer for. But what if my employer or my supervisor or the HR department gives me like a flat no on what I'm requesting? What do I do then?
So supervisors can say no at times, and there's reasons why we would say no. One of the reasons that you can say no if it's sort of an undue financial burden. So if you were saying to your supervisor, listen, I have diabetes, and what I'm going to need you to do is install a break room in our office, and I need you to stock it with 4-ounce boxes for me to be able to treat my condition throughout the day. That's probably not reasonable, because it's something that you want to be able to provide to yourself to be able to treat your high or your low blood sugar. So a lot of times diabetes related accommodations are not going to cost the employer anything, especially if I just need to have some extra time to be able to go to the restroom or to be able to treat a high or a low. So those are going to be no cost. So typically those would not be reasons why employers would say no. Whenever we think about times that they might say no would be things if you're working in an environment where things are timed. So if you work in a call center and you're expected to be able to have a certain number of calls within an hour, and there's a quota for those numbers of calls. And if you find that you're taking too much time to be able to deal with the diabetes, you may get behind your performance standards. So that might be a time when a supervisor might say no. They should never come out flat and say no from the very beginning.
Okay.
If they do, then you face the possibility of being discriminated against at work, and then you would want to go to the EEOC and file a complaint with the EEOC.
And what is the EEOC for people who aren't fluent with that acronym?
That is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And so as an employee, that is your opportunity. That's your place where you want to go if you do feel like you've been discriminated against and you want to file a complaint. And normally what I would suggest would be to try to work with your manager, work with the HR department, work with higher managers up if you need to before you go and file that complaint with the EEOC. Employers cannot retaliate against you if you do go and file a complaint, and have to be able to negotiate with you during this interactive process in good faith.
Is it good to have like a third party with you if things start to get a little maybe dicey in the discussions? Is it good to have someone who might be a little more a moderator or mediator sort of role?
I think that's a good plan. And I think a lot of times, they may have sort of labor representatives that can be neutral third parties to be able to go along with that as you're entering into these discussions. But typically, again, when you're thinking about workplace accommodations with diabetes, it's normally just asking for you to be able to have your supplies with you, deal with diabetes issues as they come up, and then there may be a request for you to be able to have time off to go to medical appointments as needed.
Got it. And I mean, people have worked for all different kinds of companies and had different kinds of jobs. So like, what if you work at a place that's very small and doesn't have the big fancy HR department? Like, what do you do in those circumstances?
You just have to go to the boss.
Okay.
Yeah. Find the boss of the office. And, I think a lot of times, especially whenever you're thinking about like family owned businesses and smaller businesses, local community businesses that may not have, corporate entities that are out there sort of supervising the management of things, it can be very informal. So again, you don't have to use magic words. You don't have to walk into the supervisor to say, I'm someone with a disability under the ADA. Did you know that, I have a significant impairment of one of my life functions?
Read from my note card sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it could be very informal, but then it can also be very formal too.
Got it. So yeah, it's just as, I'm sure, as fluid as people's way of treating diabetes. There's not going to be one size that fits every circumstance. And so like, let's back up way actually before you're sitting with your employer. What if you're in like a job interviewing sort of circumstance? When do you want to make the disclosure? Am I obligated to tell an employer that I'm interviewing with that I have diabetes, or where does that discussion happen?
This is probably one of the most frequently asked questions that we get from our young adults at FFL. And so this is a great question because this is always on everyone's mind, whether you're to the workforce or whether you're thinking about switching jobs, do you have to disclose? And my answer is no. And the EEOC's answer is no. You are under no duty to be able to expose in your initial job interview.
Got it.
I probably would not, because I don't know that it's anyone's business, and that if you don't disclose it, if you feel like you can meet the qualifications of the job on your own, then I don't think there's a reason for you to be able to disclose it at the beginning. I think that depending upon what type of job it is, if there's like a health related screen that you're going to have to do, if physical fitness test that you're going to have to take to where they're probably going to find out about the diabetes, then there might be a time when you want to disclose it. But I don't know that I would do that in the initial job interview.
So if I don't tell people, if people with diabetes aren't disclosing that, does that make us crumbs? Are we dishonest human beings for keeping that card close?
No, I think what you're doing is you're just saying that the diabetes does not define you. You're not
saying that.
You're not diabetic, Kerri. You're Kerri. Kerri applicant. And so, when you go forward as yourself, with your job, with your background, with your educational experience, with all of your work experience, that's the person that you're presenting, not the person that's tied to an insulin pump that may need a juice box.
Got it. Oh, I love that. And so kind of moving forward a little bit. So once we're hired and that sort of stuff. So people talk a lot about FMLA, and I know that family medical leave is something that's known to me, but that might be one of those weird esoteric sorts of things for other people. So can you explain what that is and how it applies to people with diabetes?
Right. So under the sort of disability and sickness related laws that we have in the workplace, there's two really big ones. We've talked about the ADA before. That's the one that allows you to have disability accommodations to keep you in the workplace.
Actually, let me stop you right there if you don't mind, because every time you say ADA, I'm wondering if we've actually said that we don't mean the American Diabetes Association and we're instead talking about the Americans with Disabilities.
I think we're definitely talking about Americans with Disabilities Act.
I wasn't sure if we did that in the beginning, so just to make sure we've got our acronyms like lined up. So ADA is not the diabetes one.
Right, but we do love the diabetes one.
All day.
But for today, we're talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act. For the Americans with Disabilities Act, that is an accommodation law that will allow you to have an accommodation to level the playing field at work. What FMLA is, that is a leave law. So that is the law that's going to be able to give you leave to be able to be at home. So again, there's two different types of leave under Family Medical Leave Act. There would be continuous leave, like if you had an accident and you were having surgery and you need to be out of work for a long period of time. And that's for your own personal health condition. There's also intermittent leave under Family Medical Leave, to where you have a health condition that is serious, but you may need to take time off to be able to go to appointments. Family Medical Leave also allows you to be able to seek leave to be able to care for a family member. And the Americans with Disabilities Act only applies to you as the individual with disability. And so I think that they can definitely run together at the same time, and ADA accommodation to allow you to stay at work, but then family medical leave to be able to cover time when you may be out of the office. And, you know, one of the great things about family medical leave is that it protects your job. And so if you do find that, you know, you go into DKA, or you do find that you're having diabetes related issues to where you can't come in for several days in a row, then it's really good to be able to have that family medical leave to be able to protect you and to protect your job. And I know that when my daughter was diagnosed with diabetes over 7 years ago, the very first thing that my supervisor said to me was to make sure that I applied for family medical leave to be able to cover what might be coming in the future for me to be able to take care of her. So that way my job in jeopardy as a parent. So I think that's really important too, to be able to know that that applies for parents who need to be able to take care of their children that have diabetes as well.
That is huge, because I know a lot of our audience that might be watching this particular session could be an adult who's looking for, you know, discussions about accommodations in the workplace and that sort of stuff. But when you're an adult who's caring for a child with diabetes, I didn't realize that those things played in there too. So that's really good information. Thank you for sharing that. So the next thing I wanted to kind of run into was, if I'm out of work because of diabetes, and I know this has happened to me once or twice in the past. You were talking about being able to call in late to work if you have a diabetes event in the morning. Like one time I had a really bad low and just was late to work, and diabetes was the only reason I was late to work. So when people with diabetes have those sorts of absences, like, can we get in trouble for that? Can we be penalized in some way by our employer for using the resources available to us? How does that play out?
Yeah, I think that what you have to keep in mind with diabetes or with any disability under the ADA is that you still have to meet performance standards. So again, you know, the purpose of an accommodation is to level the playing field. It's to allow you to be able to access your workplace, for you to be able to do regular performance in the workplace, but we really don't want to give you an unfair advantage.
Got it.
I think that people with diabetes sometimes have a hard time trying to be able to prove it, you know, prove that you were low, or, you know, versus you just stayed out too late last night with your friends, come in, you know, the next.
Show them the bedside table with all the juice boxes on it, sort of thing. Like, how do you prove that?
And I think that that's one of the things. I think that, you know, you really do need to sort of set up a good faith relationship with your manager or with your human resources department to be able to explain to them, this is what diabetes looks like to me. And we certainly are not going to try to take advantage of the diabetes, but that there may be times in life when, you know, your pancreas is just not going to work with you. And you know, you're going to have to take the time out to be able to deal with it. And so that may mean that you're late. That may mean that you have a few more medical appointments compared to, you know, the people in your workplace that are able-bodied that don't have to deal with these issues. And so I think that that's one of the things, again, I would just caution people, if you are thinking about doing some sort of absence-related request for accommodations, just to use discretion with that and truly use it for things that are diabetes-related, not to take advantage of the situation with that.
And so going back to what we had talked about earlier about not disclosing diabetes during the interview process, would you recommend that once someone has earned the job and is getting ready to start the job, regardless of the size of the company, that they sit down with their HR department or their boss and kind of walk them through some of the high level mechanics of diabetes, so that when events come up, there's no, oh, that's what that means?
I think I would tell someone. I don't know whether it has to necessarily be your supervisor or whether it needs to be HR. It might just be one of your coworkers. You know, like if you're working in a clinic and there are 3 of you that are working at the front desk, I probably would tell one of those people at the front desk. Because if you do have a low that comes on very suddenly and you need someone to offer you assistance, it would be better if someone actually knew what was going on And I think that,
Always
you
a
know,
plus.
yeah, exactly. Back in the old days of diabetes, whenever you think about things like medical alert bracelets, they really looked like medical alert bracelets that you could
Hmm.
really, see it on someone's arm and recognize, oh, that's a bracelet. But today they're so fancy and they're so discreet. You
They're
can't tell
beautiful.
they are. You don't automatically look at someone's medical alert bracelet and think, oh, there's a medical issue there, because they're very discreet and hidden. So I think it is definitely good best practice for you to be able to tell someone. You don't have to tell them, I want to teach you how to program basal rates into my pump. What you probably want to do is just sort of explain, I have diabetes. If you hear me beeping at times, this is why I'm beeping. I have this under control. But just to let them know. And especially whenever you think about, what we want to do is we want to be proud about our diabetes, and we don't want to have to hide our devices. And it's just like whenever we find a test strip on a parking lot, or on a sidewalk somewhere where we find diabetes in the wild, when I walk into a meeting and I see someone's pump tubing, like I feel like I need to walk over and like hug them automatically.
Yeah.
And let them know, I have juice boxes in my purse for you. I think just sort of helping be a good diabetes advocate for yourself, sort of explaining this is what diabetes looks like to me. And I think that that's going to go a long way in terms of sort of having a safe workplace for yourself while you're there.
That is awesome. And I also love the idea of sitting down with a coworker and being like, listen, I beep. This is why I beep. Like what a great and bonding discussion that could be.
Yeah.
And then when we're making those disclosures, you talked about explaining what diabetes might look like. But like, I keep saying me, but people with diabetes, is it a good idea for us to walk through the mechanics of something like glucagon? Or, I know we have different glucagon options now, like nasal glucagon and the pre-filled syringes and that sort of stuff. So is it good to have somebody on the HR or work team that knows that stuff?
I think probably what I would do is let somebody know that you have it. Now, in reality, if you're about to fall out and you need the red box, you're not probably going to administer that to yourself.
Right. I don't mean to laugh, but that's so like layman's terms. Like if you're in it and you need the red box, it's like, yeah, the red box.
It's not going to happen. What you probably want to do is notify people that you have emergency supplies with you, and that there will come a time when I'm going to need to ask you to be able to get one of these things out of my desk drawer. It's in my second desk drawer. It's in a red box, or it's in a little orange tube, or I keep this in my purse. I had a coworker that had epilepsy that worked for me several years ago. And so she had some emergency medication that she kept in her purse. And she told us where it was. She didn't necessarily tell us what it did, but she told us where it was in her purse, to where if she felt like she had a seizure that was coming on, she would tell us, go get the pills in my purse. Then we would get it for her, and she would be able to administer that. So
it's that building that social safety and that sort of thing. They don't need to understand exactly the mechanics of it, but just how to help when help is needed sort of thing.
Yeah.
That seems like good life advice, not necessarily something tied to a legal recommendation. So we've talked about a lot of best case scenarios. We've only touched a little bit on, if my HR department says no, or if my employer says no. But what happens if a person with diabetes feels like they're being discriminated against? What's the course of action there?
Yeah, I think that it's just really important for you to remember what we talked about in the beginning, that this is a civil right, that you have protections out there. It's not your fault that your pancreas is not working. You didn't ask for this to happen to yourself. This is something that happened to you as a serious medical condition. Because you're a person with a disability, you have certain protections. Now, that does not mean that your employer has to say yes to all of your requests. It means that they have to at least explore it with good faith. And so if you find that they are not, and if you find that, that people are giving you the side eye when they see your pump, or if you feel like that somehow you're being treated not like the other people in your workplace, then what I would recommend is doing something internally first, finding some sort of advocate within your workplace, if you have one of those, to where you can go and share what your thoughts are. And then explore thinking about going to the EEOC, filing a complaint with them, or also reaching out to other advocacy groups. Disability Rights has groups that are in every single state, calling the American Diabetes Association to talk with one of their advocates. There's lots of other things that you can do. There's also the Job Accommodation Network that you can call, and you can ask them for advice as well. So I think that there's places for you to reach out to where you don't feel like you've got to sort of hide the diabetes, because you're not going to make it go away. So what we have to do is we have to try to be able to welcome it to the workplace with you, and find a way to be able to coexist with diabetes while you're doing your job.
And so you have mentioned a lot of different resources, and I know that normally we do this presentation where you have a nice slide deck and you get to stand in front of a room of people and the Q&A is coming at you. So are you able to provide the slides that you would have presented at a live conference so that we can maybe put them down below this video?
Yeah, absolutely. I will give you the
Okay.
slide deck, and all of those resources will be on there, and my contact information is on there too. So happy to be able to talk with anybody about any sort of conversations that you have about workplace accommodations or educational accommodations as well. I welcome all of those questions.
And what if somebody needs like a Friends for Life virtual hug, or they have, yeah.
I will hug you just like this. I will hug you in my Friends for Life shirt and my pajama pants that I'm wearing.
Oh, are you not wearing real pants either?
No.
Nice
No.
work.
No.
Yep. Nice shirt, lipstick, weird pants. I'm here for that.
We're so glad that you all joined us, and I wish that I could have been with you in person in Indianapolis, and look forward to hopefully seeing everybody in Orlando, and keep on going, keep your remote working going. And for those of you that happen to not be able to remote work right now, sending you lots of orange and green hugs, and hoping that we all get through this together.
And Leigh, thank you so much for being generous with your time this morning and making this information available to everybody. And now not only do we get to connect with the people who would have been in Indianapolis, but we can spread this out to the broader CWD community and really get that virtual hug thing going and the information. So thank you very much for spending your time with us.
You're welcome. Thanks, Kerri.